The Beatles are one of, if not the, most documented band in history. Well, there's weirdly enough a couple of contenders for that, but still, very rarely can you say that you know what someone had for dinner on Christmas of 1962. But sure enough, it was horse meat. But even then, there are still things that occasionally slip through the cracks and end up becoming lost to time, sometimes even forever, and even in the most obvious of places. One of those places is, weirdly enough, on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, where we see our quartet surrounded by a crowd of renowned public figures, accompanied with flowers, waxworks, and cultural artifacts. It is one of the most iconic and studied album covers of all time, yet its full story still hasn't been told. Every figure in this photo has been identified for decades, all except one. A new online development shows an unfamiliar, unusual figure present in the candid behind-the-scenes images of the Sgt. Pepper's photoshoot, a figure which is very faintly visible on the album cover. It is very easy to miss. To this very day, we have no idea who this person is, where this image comes from, and why it was important enough to be featured on Sgt. Pepper with the likes of Edgar Allan Poe, Albert Einstein, and Marilyn Monroe. In fact, not even the very people who worked on the album remember who this is. What's even more strange is that many published guides which label everything featured on the album seem to either omit it entirely, label this figure as unknown, or label it with a number while skipping over it on the guide. As you can see, this has been a mystery for a long time, but with a little help from some friends, it has recently picked up a community of online sleuths trying to put the matter to rest. Today, we're going to talk about it, the search efforts, the theories, and my own speculations, which can hopefully fix this hole in one of music history's greatest works of art. First, we need to look at how the photoshoot for Sgt. Pepper's played out. The way things were arranged that day, the creative process behind it, and so on. These are all things which can provide context, as well as potential clues for who this mystery figure is. The shoot took place at Chelsea Manor Studios in London on March 30th, 1967. You could say that the creative minds involved in the Sgt. Pepper's cover were the renowned pop art couple Peter Blake and Jan Howarth. The entire approach to creating the collage was quite interesting, and a bit unconventional. For one, the Beatles' iconic mustaches from this period were not really an aesthetic choice, but rather an attempt for Paul McCartney to hide a scar on his lip after a moped accident. The rest of them just followed suit to blend in. Despite not being an inherently creative decision, it shows just how different this album was going to be from their previous work, and how different the Beatles would be from then on. They were quite literally taking on their alter egos that they found themselves escaping to during their intense pressure from touring and from the press. The name Sgt. Pepper came from a plane ride in 1966 where their roadie Mal Evans asked Paul for the salt and pepper, which Paul humorously misheard as Sgt. Pepper. This was where the name for their other persona came from. And so at this time, the band was no longer touring. They were facing intense backlash from the States over a comment John Lennon made about Jesus Christ, and backlash for accidentally snubbing the First Lady of the Philippines. They were fatigued and wanted to do something they had never done before. And the album needed to reflect that, and so did the cover. Paul said that he never liked how record labels would handle creating the album covers, because they felt rather lackluster and directionless, to say the least. He believed that the visuals needed to be just as powerful as the music itself. It should tell a story, their story, of escaping what the public thought Beatles music should be, escaping as the Lonely Hearts Club Band, a name which really hammers in this concept. In fact, Sgt. Pepper's would be one of the earliest examples of what is now known as the concept album. Instead of just a collection of songs, all the songs tell one cohesive narrative with a central theme. There's obviously a lot of nuance to this definition in regards to Sgt. Pepper specifically, but that's for another video. But in short, the cover would show our quartet performing at a British park, surrounded by a huge audience of admirers. Many of these people were either historical figures and people that were admired by the album artists. It even includes the Beatles themselves, as, after all, this is the Lonely Hearts Club Band, not the Beatles, so naturally they should be included too. Each person got to submit their own people to be included, except for Ringo, who claimed he decided to let the others attend to it. John's submissions included Hitler and Jesus. While a Hitler cutout was made, given the recent controversies surrounding the band, both figures were omitted for obvious reasons. This entire concept for the cover was largely the work of Blake and Howarth. The photography was done by Michael Cooper. Also, can I just say how contemporary and modern this guy looks? He definitely knows what Venmo is. Anyway, Cooper was also involved in which figures would be shown and how they would be shown, which leads to our mystery figure. It is largely obscured behind the wax figures of George Harrison and Sonny Liston, but in the behind-the-scenes candid images of the shoot, the figure is much more visible. These images we have available are only in black and white, which makes it hard to determine if the cutout itself was in fact from a color image. Though based on the limited amounts that can be seen on the finalized image, I think it is more likely that the cutout itself is also in black and white. If that is the case, it could help us better determine an approximation for when the image was taken. These photos we have are also a bit blurry, so it is hard to discern specific details. This has since led people to interpret very different things within the image. For one, some people have pointed out what may appear to be a camera hanging down the bottom of the person's torso. You can also see some discoloration that would resemble a strap for it, hinting that this could be a photographer. We can also see based on the body position that the figure is gesturing towards their mouth. But then again, with these blurry photographs, it is very hard to tell. Some have theorized that it could be someone playing a harmonica or eating something. Heck, many of the guides that do put a label on it call it the unidentified laughing figure, with some interpreting the figure as putting their hand over their face and giggling. I personally, quite confidently, think that this is not the case. It is much more likely that it is a photo of a person eating what appears to be a sandwich. If you look closely, you can see the figure's mouth biting down onto something, and even a triangular shape resembling a sandwich in their other hand. It is based on this very limited knowledge that people have put together theories for who this figure could be. Like I mentioned earlier, someone was lucky enough to get the opportunity to ask Peter Blake himself and show him the image. But alas, he did not remember all those years later. Of course, the diagram he mentions does not include helpful information for the figure on it. But amazingly, through a connection of mine, I was able to get word from none other than Beatles historian Tom Frangione. Granted, his response is not definitive, but based on what he does know, his educated guess for who the figure could be was quite surprising. He believes it could be musician Screamin Jay Hawkins. Jay was known for having a very unconventional, even macabre musical style for his time, and of course these eccentricities would attract none other than the Beatles themselves. Paul enjoyed his music, and Jay even ended up doing a cover of Monkberry Moon Delight later on. I wasn't very convinced of this at first, but the more I studied the image, the more promising of an answer it became. Although the complexion of the figure is lighter than Jay, the hair definitely looks more similar to his from those photos, and they do share a lot of the same facial structure. The sort of odd pose that the figure has would match the strange and bold onstage persona that Jay had. A lot of people have actually reached this conclusion on their own as well. In fact, the suggestion that it's Jay is currently the all-time most popular post for the community that's trying to solve this mystery. So yeah, my stock for this possibility has definitely gone up, but I am still a bit mixed on it. For one thing, Tom's observation adds a lot of credence to this possibility, given his expert knowledge on the Beatles and all the incredible work he's done to preserve their legacy. But at the same time, the image just looks a little too old. In my opinion, the thick raincoat and even just the overall appearance and presentation of the image feels like it is from around the 1920s or 1930s. A lot of online sleuths also share the same sentiment and have taken that into account when trying to figure out this person's identity. One prominent candidate is Charlie Chaplin. Although it seems very unlikely at a first glance, there is a lot of strong visual evidence that supports this. Firstly, the hairstyle and facial structure is actually quite similar to many earlier photos of Charlie Chaplin in his career, especially the photos of him without his iconic mustache. Based on the candidness and somewhat awkward posture of the figure and the fact that there is a little bit of motion blur present, I do think there's a big possibility that this is actually a frame from a film. Now, films of Charlie Chaplin without his mustache are rare, but they do exist. But unfortunately, from the research I gathered, I could not find any movie of him that looked close to this kind of setting. There is a clip of him eating that is obviously from a different source, but the similarities in facial features and how Charlie Chaplin looks while he's eating does increase this possibility. Also, just from a personal observation of mine, you can often tell whether an image is from the 1920s or 30s, weirdly enough, from the person's eyes. If you've ever wondered why people in silent films look kind of creepy and ghostly, particularly with dark circles around the eyes, it is in large part because of the makeup that was used on them. Cameras at the time were very weak and couldn't really pick up human faces in great detail, and made them look very dull and gray. So actors had their faces caked in special makeup that would brighten them up. The reason I bring this up is because I sort of see that pale, silent film look on this person's face. This not only helps potentially date the photo, but may even help narrow down whether it's a creative, fictional setting, or a journalistic, editorial one. Another clue would also be the placing of the figure on the album. Although the order of much of the cutouts is a bit randomized, many of them are paired up in specific categories. For example, you have the famous comedy duo Laurel and Hardy next to each other. As one online user pointed out, you also have Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni paired up, and they starred in many films together. In fact, near our mystery figure, you have a pair of Petty Girls, comedian Max Miller, and Shirley Temple, who were all prominent figures throughout the 1930s World War II era. Now, this might seem a bit irrelevant, and it very well could be, but it could also enhance the possibility of this figure being someone like Charlie Chaplin, who was also popular during this era. Once again, this could just be a stretch, as there are plenty of other 1930s figures present on other sides of the image, but something I had thought about before even noticing this pairing is that this could be a photo of someone from the Great Depression. Now, this is my personal theory, and I haven't yet found anyone online who has talked about it, but I've noticed that in many photos taken during the Great Depression, the people in them are wearing very similar clothing to our subject. They often sport these sort of thick trench coat style suits. This makes me think that this could also be a photo of someone in a bread line. This would explain the person eating what looks like a sandwich. And if you look at Depression-era breadline photos, they do look very similar. Just like with the Charlie Chaplin theory, this would of course also fall in line with the 1930s categorization. And it would make sense for the Beatles to include this on the album, as the Great Depression was a very important cultural, historical event. Another person that would fit this category, and arguably the most popular theory of all, is that this is Amelia Earhart. This is, in my opinion, the strongest one. The evidence is just so compelling. I found several photos of Amelia Earhart that are strikingly close, even down to the clothing. Not only does the hair match, but the little details of the jacket and undershirt, I think, line up almost identically. Additionally, I even found some articles on newspapers.com that also may weirdly provide an explanation for the sandwich theory. There were a few articles from 1935 that talked about what Earhart brought with her for lunch on her flight from Honolulu to the continental US. She talks about bringing some sandwiches, and also bringing with her a lunch personally prepared for her by the wife of an island officer. Another article from the same event even mentions her eating her sandwich before going back onto the plane, and even an admirer giving her a ham sandwich as soon as she got off the plane. Sure enough, the images taken from that specific flight do look very similar to our figure. I think it is very likely that a photo was taken of her eating this sandwich, and that is the image we are seeing on the album cover. Granted, looking for this specific image through newspapers.com is like a needle in a haystack, so I currently haven't had any luck with it, but I think that this is by far the most likely identity of our subject. And it would, of course, make sense for the Beatles to feature someone important like Amelia Earhart on the album. But the question is, why this specific image of her, and not instead something more recognizable and iconic? If it was Charlie Chaplin, why not a picture of him dressed up as the Tramp? Or Amelia Earhart with one of her planes? It's definitely not above the Beatles to make an intentionally esoteric reference to something in their work, just so the select few can appreciate it, but I think another thing could be at play here as well. Copyright. This is another reason for why I mentioned the creative process behind Sgt. Pepper as a preamble to this video, because EMI was initially not happy about it for this exact reason. They took one look at the concept and said, "This is nonsense, we're not having this," to which the Beatles responded, "We will have it." So, as a compromise, they put the responsibility on Beatles manager Brian Epstein to get the rights to all the images that were used. Now, most media from the 1920s and even some from the 1930s is public domain, but not in the 60s, as the 20s and 30s were obviously more recent at that time. It is very well possible that, for whatever reason, Brian Epstein could not get the rights to a more recognizable photo of Amelia Earhart, Charlie Chaplin, or whoever. So instead, they used one that they did have access to, perhaps one that has not survived the internet. And so, that's where we're at. The answer to who this person is we just don't know. I know it's a bit anticlimactic, but that's only because the story isn't over yet. The online search for this figure goes as far back as 2017, and even earlier through centralized mass media. However, in an increasingly growing world of preserving information and finding lost media, this little scavenger hunt has seen a reemergence. Trust that I will be following up with update videos if any huge leads surface. I don't believe we have heard the end of this tale, and I do think it's only a matter of time before we find another piece to this puzzle and further add to the legacy of history's greatest rock group. If you would like to see more Beatles and classic rock-related content, you're in the right place. Click subscribe and like this video for more content. Let me know in the comments who you think this person is as well. Thank you for watching, everyone.